joining us for today's webinar, The Hermana's Keeper, a toolkit of promising practices for juvenile justice prevention programs supporting Latina youth. My name is Allison Friedman, and I am with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other webinar-related handouts, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Click on the name of the file and then click the Download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenters will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute and help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. This certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye on your email for your certificate. Finally, this event will be archived in approximately 3 weeks on OJJDP's online university at www.ojjdpou.org, where you can also find additional resources and view past webinars. Again, thank you for joining us today. I will now turn it over to Shakira Washington from OJJDP's National Girls Initiative to begin today's webinar.
Great, thank you very much. And again, good afternoon, and thank you for joining this afternoon's webinar, Me, Hermana's Keeper, a toolkit of promising practices for juvenile justice prevention programs supporting Latina youth. Again, my name is Shakira Washington, and I am the Senior Director at the National Crittenden Foundation and Deputy Director of the OJJDP National Girls Initiative. I'm pleased to be joined by our 3 presenters today, Maria Campos, Gladys Pena, and Deanna Swan from Southwest Key Programs. So just a brief description of our presenters. Deanna Swan is a Research and Evaluation Specialist in the Performance Quality Improvement Department at Southwest Key Programs. In her role, she works closely with the Director of the Department to support evidence-based practice research and the development and implementation of quality improvement across the organization. Ms. Swan earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, her master's degree in education from the University of Pennsylvania, and she is currently working toward her PhD in education administration at the University of Texas at Austin. Maria Campos is Program Director at Southwest Key Programs. She oversees several community-based programs that focus on youth mentoring, alternatives to incarceration, wraparound services, and case management that includes the entire family. She is responsible for program administration and development, budget oversight, data management, and direct client services. Prior to her current position, she served on the Performance Quality Improvement Team, where she oversaw and developed the database programming that Southwest Keys uses organization-wide, while also assisting in grant writing and research. Ms. Campos also led the development of the Latina Toolkit, Me, Hermana's Keeper, which you'll be hearing about on today's webinar. Ms. Campos has worked for members of Congress and the state legislature and has been an advocate for the Austin community locally and statewide. She holds an MPA in Nonprofit Management and Public Policy from the CUNY Baruch College, where she was selected as a National Urban Fellow. And finally, Gladys Pena is the Clinical Regional Executive Director at Southwest Key. She has been working at Southwest Key since 2014, starting as a Program Director/Clinician for the Webb County Community Connections Program and the Family Keys Program, providing individual, family, and group counseling. In 2016, Ms. Pena also became the clinician for the Case Management and Telecounseling Program, where she provides telecounseling services to youth and their families in rural communities. Ms. Tanya has been in the counseling field since 2009 and is experienced working with adults, youth, and families. In 2012, Ms. Tanya graduated from Texas A&M International University with a master's degree in counseling psychology. And Ms. Tanya is also a member of Psi Chi International Honor Society in Psychology. But just to do a really quick, brief description of the National Girls Initiative. Basically, the National Girls Initiative, or NGI, with funding from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency and Prevention, focuses primarily on catalyzing change for girls in and at risk of entering the juvenile justice system. The goal of NGI is to drive new resources to state, local, and tribal efforts to address girls' needs and to share information on evidence-based practices that are trauma-informed and gender and culturally responsive. NGI also works to elevate the voices of girls and their families as partners in improving the juvenile justice system. And now I would like to turn it over to today's webinar over to our presenters. Deanna?
Thank you, Shakira. Welcome, everyone. As Shakira mentioned, I am Deanna Swan, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity today and truly honored to partner with Gladys, Maria, and Southwest Key on this critical topic and work. We also want to take a second to thank and acknowledge OJJDP, NGI, and the Noble Foundation for supporting this research. And as it was mentioned, Mi Hermana's Keeper is a toolkit of promising practices for juvenile justice prevention programs that serve Latina youth. And before we get started, we want to get some engagement from you all, so we're going to put a poll up on the screen. And if you don't mind, if you could just answer the first question, what sector you represent. This is going to help us to see who's on the call today. And hopefully the toolkit was designed to be general enough to apply to all different sectors that support Latina youth in prevention programs. So just want to get an idea of who's listening. And we'll take about, 15 seconds or so to see your responses here. So probably not a surprise to any of us. It looks like majority coming from juvenile justice sector, but we definitely have representation from various other sectors as well. This looks great. Lots of youth development also. And then the second poll question, if you didn't get a chance to answer, no worries. The second poll question is what is it that you need to better support Latina youth in your work and in your role? And if you could just select one, please, and try to imagine as you're selecting your response as if funding's not an obstacle for you or your organization. And this is great. So it looks like a lot of you are selecting culturally specific training, and we really hope that this webinar is one step in the right direction for you all and for your organizations, and you're able to hopefully get started on some of that culturally specific training using the toolkit. Thanks, Adam, for those polls. So our agenda for, got my arrows were working on the computer, sorry about that. Our agenda for the webinar is to first introduce Southwest Key. We'll do a real brief overview, and then we'll discuss the research, design, and methodology of our Mi Hermana's Keeper toolkit, and we'll do an overview of the findings for you. We're going to talk about 6 program level and 3 system level recommendations in the toolkit, and then this webinar is going to do a little bit deeper dive into 2 of the recommendations, and Gladys and Maria are going to lead us in that discussion of some of the action steps that are related to the recommendations, and we'll wrap up with a Q&A section. Our hope by the end of this webinar is that you're going to feel empowered to reflect on your role and apply some of the findings from our toolkit into your own work. Southwest Key Programs was founded in December of 1987 by our President and CEO, Dr. Juan Sanchez, in San Antonio, Texas. We relocated and are currently headquartered in Austin, Texas, and are classified as a 501c3 national nonprofit. We have locations in 7 different states, and the organization was founded to provide better alternatives to create opportunities for at-risk youth and their families. We are accredited by the Council on Accreditation and have been since 2008, And we currently operate 87 juvenile justice and family programs. We operate safe shelters for immigrant children, schools, and community initiatives. One of the juvenile justice programs that we operate is called Family Keys, which served as a research site for this toolkit. And Family Keys is a research-based diversion program that assists youth between 10 and 17 years old, and we work to improve their attendance, to gain motivation for school, address their family needs and their conflicts, and ultimately to reduce their disciplinary issues. And the youth that we work with participate in Family Keys for about 3 months, and they participate in services that include home-based wraparound case management. We offer connections to community resources through linkages and referrals. We provide concrete support, and key to this concrete support is that we provide it for families, other family members and parents as well. And the research for our toolkit was limited to 3 of our Texas program locations. They were in Austin, Laredo, and San Antonio. And we serve a high percentage of Latino youth, as you might imagine, in Texas, and particularly in these 3 cities. So just within these 3 Family Keys programs where the research took place, approximately 39% of our youth that were served in 2016 were Latina youth. So unfortunately, research and practice in the juvenile justice field often ignore the needs of system-involved girls, and particularly Latinas. So the purpose of our study was to examine the needs of our Latina youth across our programs who have been or are at risk of being involved in the juvenile justice system. And it was through a community-based participatory action research study that we identified primary themes from 9 different focus groups with Latina youth, their caregivers, and key stakeholders who were all associated with our Family Keys program in those 3 Texas locations. Most of the Latinas in our study were from Mexican or Mexican-American ethnic backgrounds, which we can touch on a little bit more later on in our action steps. We also conducted 11 semi-structured, in-depth supplemental interviews with the youth in an effort to further draw out their voices, asking a little bit more detailed questions for some of them than was mentioned in the focus groups. And then the qualitative results ultimately identified 8 themes, 8 key themes, and 9 corresponding program and system recommendations for community-based prevention programs that work with Latina youth. If you have a full toolkit document open in front of you, that's great. If you don't, you should have access to an attachment here through this system. But you can see how we organize our themes, our recommendations, and our action steps beginning on page 15 of the toolkit. And if you're not looking at it now, no worries, but I encourage you to definitely take a look. But this slide provides an example of how our recommendations were derived directly from our themes, which were determined from the data that we coded in a qualitative research software. And during the focus group, discussions of ethnic identity brought up both positive and negative associations that Latina youth expressed knowledge of, but little connection to the implications of their ethnic identities. And so a lot of the caregivers found it very important, but acknowledged the challenges of protecting that Latino culture. And that divergence is what led to recommendation 1 that you can see on the slide here, which is to provide services that are respectful and reflective of shared and individual Latino cultural heritage. So because some of the recommendations can feel maybe too general or a little overwhelming for particularly folks who are unfamiliar with Latino cultural norms, we also offer specific action steps within each recommendation that can help you to implement the recommendations in your program or your work or your advocacy. So for the sake of time, we're not going to be able to offer real detailed examples of each recommendation and action step, but we do want to provide you some detail. So Gladys and Maria are going to provide a couple of illustrations for you all, and I'm going to turn it over to Gladys.
Thanks so much, Deanna. So as she mentioned, I'll give you a quick walkthrough of one of our program level recommendations, and that's recommendation number 2, and 2 of its respective action steps. But I'll start with this. So the picture you see here is of me helping my family prepare the food for my cousin's birthday party. And so why do I show you this picture? Well, I do so because it's a reflection of my definition of who I am as a Latina. For me, it's the coming together of my family when in need. It's the food I'm preparing. It's my experience as a migrant worker, and it's my experience of learning the English language in the 4th grade. This, to me, is what makes me Latina. But being Latina looks very different for us all. And therefore, in the work that we do with Latinas, it's necessary that we learn what experiences, tradition, or norms make up their definition of being Latina. On page 10 of our toolkit, we heard our girls identifying themselves as Mexican, Mexican-American, Chicana, Mestizo, Tex-Mex, Hispanic, or Latina. And we acknowledge that there are so many more included in this. So in our focus group, Latina spoke at length about wanting to be heard and valuing respect. Caregivers and stakeholders shared that they want Latina youth to learn to show respect. And so we found that within respeto or respect, there's this reciprocal relationship. Youth value receiving respect, while caregivers value the giving of respect. Our Latinas passionately shared wanting others to listen, wanting others to respect what they have to say and not judge it. And in the words of one of our Latina youth, she says, actually listen and not have like a smart comment to say about it or like laugh at it. Just sit there and listen. Now, our caregivers shared that respect was an important lesson identified to pass down to their children, saying that they're raising their daughters to show respect, to help others, and to know right from wrong, go to church, and value education. And our stakeholders, they strongly voiced that they want to focus on Latina youth strengths, help them understand that they're a part of the process, and that they can recover from a bad decision. So because of all that we heard, we recommend that we provide services that value respect and teach respectful practices. So how do we put recommendation 2 into practice? Well, for the sake of time, we'll cover action step 1 and action step 4, and I'll give you a sort of insight into how that looks like in practice or how that looks like in the work that we do. So action step 1 tells us to train staff to uphold key cultural value of Latino families. The Latino culture includes a complex value system in which they share core values and beliefs. But again, to avoid overgeneralizing, being insensitive, we must be mindful of the fact that each family is different and they differ in the level in which they uphold each of these cultural values. So it's going to be important for us to know what they are, how they are expressed in each family, by each family member and or generation. So the core values and beliefs are familismo, personalismo, respeto, and espiritualismo. So familismo is the importance of la familia and the importance of being a good family member. So in other words, the well-being or needs of the family unit comes before the well-being or needs of the individual member. The great value is placed on familial interconnectedness, like remaining physically close or emotionally close. Family reciprocity or agradecimiento, which is the taking care of each other, is also greatly valued. For Latino families, family includes immediate family members, extended family members like aunts, uncles, and cousins, also godparents, and any other close family members. So how does that translate into the work that we do? Well, for us, familismo creates an opportunity to enhance natural supports or natural resources for the family. This gives us easy access to a support system. Family can also serve as a motivator for positive change or behavior. But what that can also look like is a family wanting their adolescent to work versus go to school. And this may be so because work meets the need of the family and school meets the need of the individual. So in knowing where this comes from, it allows us to address this more sensitively. In personalismo, there's a strong focus on relationships. And we see this as being the key to building rapport with families. So there's great importance towards interpersonal respect and trust, or this formal friendliness. So because Latinos place great attention to the welcome greeting, which in a way resembles the breaking of the bread before getting down to business, they typically share a warm welcome with each other. So how we can work within this value is by paying attention to how families greet you. So do they prefer a handshake, a kiss on the cheek, or a hug? And you don't have to do this, but it would be helpful to value the welcoming and the greeting time and being intentional within them. Physical touch also holds value and can generally express compassion and support. And along the same line is the accepting of gifts or offering, like a glass of water, a beverage, a fruit. And in doing so, it can enhance the trust and allows Latinos to express agradecimiento or appreciation. Politeness and courtesy are also key to establishing great rapport. So it's the asking for permission to sit down or direct questions or the conversation to other family members. And respeto or respect. So Latinos place high importance on demonstrating respect during interactions. Respeto emphasizes one's place within the hierarchy of the family and is expressed differently based on age or gender. So how does that look like in the work that we do? We'll take, for example, the action of making decisions. At times, family will defer certain decisions as respect to a family member of a higher position. And this sort of brought me back to a family that I worked with a few years ago. And so in this situation, it was apparent that the youth was in dire need of long-term therapy or counseling. And I made this known to mother, who shared that she needed to run this by her husband before accepting such services or making such a drastic decision. So if we were to take her response out of context, this response could probably have been seen as being resistant or negligent. So in the understanding that deferring a decision to her husband is a form of respect, we can address this issue more sensitively. Families also uphold respect in a way of non-questioning or challenging professionals, such as in court or even yourself. So what can be helpful is taking time to debrief before a hearing or meeting and making a list of questions that family would like to ask. So in my own practice, and now it's it sort of has become my habit, is I've also changed my "do you have any questions" after closing out a session or a meeting to "are there any questions I can answer for you?" And finally, espiritualismo. So espiritualismo is this belief that a higher power or spirits can affect their health, luck, or other aspects of their life. A traditional belief is mal de ojo, or the evil eye, and that's a transfer of negative energy. So knowing that envy or jealousy can inhabit a person, this can be avoided or dismissed through a touch. So in other cultures, this may look like carrying a rabbit's foot for good luck or throwing salt over your shoulder to avoid treachery. Action 4 tells us to hold individual check-ins with Latina youth and remind them that they are part of the process and in control. So as I said before, Latina youths want to be heard. In our focus group, one of our Latina youth shared something as simple as, "Just ask how I'm doing," goes a long way. So providing youth with autonomy shares the message that we acknowledge and respect that they know their feelings, their wishes, their desires, and goals. Therefore, give Latina youth a place during service planning meeting. Give them the voice to voice what goals are important to them. If you hold discussion groups or group counseling, ask Latina youth what topics are important to them, and respecting the pace that they're doing the work. Forming a partnership. So partnership goes beyond engagement. In partnership, we want to share the message that this relationship is a close cooperation and that we both have rights and responsibilities. So this is a brief look at one of the 6 program level recommendations. Maria will now give you a look into one of the 3 system level recommendations.
Thank you, Gladys, and thank you everyone again for being in this space with us. So as Gladys mentioned, I will be reviewing a systemic level recommendation from the Toolkit because as we all know, we can address changes at the program level, but it won't be entirely effective if we're not also addressing and looking at changes at the systemic level where our girls interact with these different systems every day, right? So for this presentation, I will be taking a deeper look at how to build culturally responsive school practices as it relates to our Latina youth. Being mindful that these practices are not just, don't just make sense to do them in the schools, but also anywhere that our girls interact, whether that be the juvenile justice systems, judicial systems, nonprofit, really this can work anywhere. And so the importance of checking in with each student before beginning the lesson for each day is of paramount importance. It allows for our girls to cool down from what they may be experiencing at home, asking how they are, how their weekend was. The point is really getting to know our girls on a more personal level really helps to build trust and rapport and break down any barriers that might exist. The second action item from this recommendation is advocating for school staff to use Spanish where possible. In our Family Keys programs in our Texas region, 30% of our parents speak Spanish only, so this is really an important thing to have in our programs. Supporting access to cultural capital, so promoting communication between caregivers and staff is really what's going to make the relationship successful. In addition to scheduling a conference with the parent, it's also important to reach out by phone or in person or visiting the home to create a more personal and deeper connection, because Latino families are all about that personal connection. Incorporating curriculum that is relatable to our girls' daily lives, right? And our hermanas from the Chinachli program are already doing this and have already paved the way out in places like California and New Mexico. But really what we took from our focus group and our research in the Mi Hermana's Toolkit is that understanding the importance of biculturalism, right? Because our girls are very loyal to our heritage, our Latino heritage, but we're also American. And so as educators and system level workers, we need to recognize and honor this dual identity, if you will, that our girls are experiencing every day of their lives, but really never get a chance to have this space to talk about it. Also the importance of being healing informed, because up to 85 or 90% of the youth that we serve at Southwest Key have experienced some form of either primary or secondary trauma, past trauma, and many of them have not had the chance to really heal from it. So our girls interact with all of these systems every day, their school systems, the juvenile justice systems, with this fight or flight mentality from the trauma that's never been healed. And so they might be walking through the halls of their school one day and get bumped into by another student, and their defense mechanisms may go up, whereas a youth who has had a chance to heal from this trauma will take that as, oh, this person accidentally bumped into me. And then mental health trauma, right? There's a social stigma that exists a lot within our Latino families, where we're very protective of what is going on within the family, and we don't really want to share it, and we want to be protective and take care of that within the family. And then also the health disparities that exist amongst the Latino families is we don't have as much access to basic health care as other populations, and so there's a stigma that exists, and oftentimes the trauma and the mental health is never addressed until many years down the road. So before I go into the next section, I just want you to read this quote, and it really encapsulates and illustrates the message that we're really trying to get across in this section of really teaching schools how to be more inclusive, teaching all systems how to be more inclusive to our Latina youth. So the quote is, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." So as part of teaching schools to be more inclusive, as I mentioned earlier, the implementation and integration of culturally relevant curriculum as it pertains to our Latina youth is of paramount importance, but then also, again, meeting trauma instead of, meeting our kids with treating trauma instead of with discipline. And so I took this study, or we took this study as an example to show you how a school in New Orleans, junior high, implemented various trainings to address trauma within their youth. And so after the study, results showed that teachers needed to be trained on how to recognize signs of basic trauma. So in doing so, allowing for safe space for the youth, they incorporated sessions with social workers, counselors, even inviting teachers to sit in on these sessions where possible. And so that's something that we are really mindful of here at Southwest Key, and our Family Keys program is providing a safe space for our Latina youth. Also the importance of allowing for journaling or sharing, because many times our youth don't have this space, within their homes or everyday life. Some other things that we've incorporated in our programs is the healthy coping alternatives and healthy coping mechanisms, things such like yoga, poetry, poetry, for example, horse therapy, swimming, and meditation, which have really shown to be effective in addressing different forms of trauma, both past and current. And then research has also shown and suggested that activities that have a calming motion or rhythm can also help soothe forms of trauma in our youth. But the importance is not being so quick to discipline, but really asking questions and getting this really important training for all of our stakeholders is really important. So this activity was an activity that we were introduced, Southwest was introduced to at a cultural competency training, and we've started to implement it into our programs, and it's been shown to be really effective when speaking with our youth and breaking down barriers. And so we really encourage you to use this as an example of of sitting down with your youth and asking them personally, how do you identify yourself, right? Because many of us have these assumptions of Latina youth that we're all one thing, but we don't fit in this cookie-cutter mentality. We're all very different. Even within subsects of the Mexican population, depending on acculturation or generation, your answers may vary greatly. And so what you would do with your youth is have them write down their name in the middle. So my name's Maria, and then with each subsequent petal, they would describe something about themselves. So I identify as Chicana, Tejana. I'm a sister, I'm a tia, I'm a daughter. I'm compassionate, I'm a Democrat, I'm Catholic. So depending on how the youth identifies themselves, you'll really learn a lot, and it'll really be eye-opening. But the point is to really ask them how they identify each one personally. So now I'm going to talk about some of the vignettes or the actual real qualitative research that we took from our Latinas in this research. And so the title of this section is called Because We Are Not Like Them. And so the majority of Latinas in our focus groups felt like they are treated differently. And the quote is, we think no matter what you do, they treat you differently. Many felt that they have been labeled or assumed to be bad. I feel like they think we're bad or something. And so a research study was done at the University of Texas with researchers from Yale and Stanford. And so this next quote, I just want you to read it to yourself and let it sink in as I'm going over the results from this study. So the study was called When School Doesn't Seem Fair, Students May Suffer Lasting Effects. And so what it found was when students believe schools are unfair places, their loss of trust can lead to a lack of engagement that affects them for years to come. Students who receive a lack of justice or disparate treatment may respond with defiant behavior. Latino students often bear the brunt of this inconsistent school discipline and are less likely than white peers to trust their schools. It also found, this research study also found that a higher perception of bias led to a lower sense of school trust, and our Latina youth were more likely to be cited for discipline. In contrast, when teachers placed high expectations on their students, it helped to build more rapport and trust within their Latina youth. The study also found that exercises designed to promote empathy in teachers led to lower suspension rates. And with this study, the teachers stayed mindful of their students' perspectives, and they also let this awareness continually inform their practices in word and in deed. And they continued to show authentic interest in their Latino youth and Black youth, their perspective in how the world works. So the importance is incorporating exercises that help reduce bias. And so one example that we found in our research is the example of the ethnocultural empathy scale. And researchers like Dr. Batson and Dr. Bernadette Sanchez have really recommended this as being effective. And so, but again, this is just one example of a type of exercise that you might implement. And it's been shown to really help implement trainings and be effective at reducing implicit bias. And the reason that we point this out is that our Latina youth emphasize the importance of having their opinions be heard and not being judged. And currently in the Austin community, while the majority of youth do happen to be Latino youth, the majority of teachers still happen to be white. So this may be an effective tool to use, but it's not the only effective tool out there. And so this scale happens to score for things like empathic feeling and expression, empathic perspective taking, acceptance of cultural differences, and empathic awareness. And just some samples of the questions, I'll read them, is I feel irritated when people with different racial or ethnic backgrounds speak their language around me. Or I am aware of how society differentially treats racial or ethnic groups other than my own. And so more than anything, what we found out of our research is our girls just want teachers, case managers, probation officers, and others to take them seriously and set high expectations. They want to be taught real-world skills such as being financially responsible, setting goals for career planning and life after high school. And the parents also set high expectations for their daughters, and they want them to do better than the previous generation and continue to have better outcomes, as we all do. And lastly, we would just like to recognize our elders who have paved the way for this important research. Dr. Juan Sanchez, our Presidente and CEO, who also creates this thoughtful leadership amongst Southwest Key and creates spaces like this for us to have. Numerous members of the National Alianza for Latino Youth Justice, of which Dr. Sanchez is the co-founder, Marcia Rincon Gallardo of Knoxteen, and Jerry Theo of the National Compadres Network, and Sarah Husky Mendoza Chinachli, who have all pioneered amazing healing-informed programming and curriculum for our Latina and Latino youth, and also curriculum such as La Cultura Cura. And so to close, you'll see before you that this is the all-encompassing Mi Hermana's toolkit of the 9 program level and system level recommendations that encompass this wonderful toolkit. But just for today, we just highlighted number 2, which was providing services that value respeto and teach respectful practices and building culturally responsive practices. Please excuse the circles. It's just a little formatting issue. And so thank you so much for your time, everyone, and back to you, Shakira.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maria, Diana, and Gladys. That was a fantastic presentation. And of course, you only touched on some bits and pieces around the toolkit and some of the recommendations. And I would definitely encourage everyone, who's listening in today to reach out to Southwest Key if you're interested in getting more information about their toolkit and their process of developing the toolkit. So now we are actually sort of entering into the phase of question and answers, and we actually have quite a bit of time. We have probably about 20 minutes to field various questions. So if anyone who's been listening in on the webinar has a question, please be sure to type it into the chat box, which is off to the right of the main PowerPoint presentation, and we will grab those as those come in. So one of the questions that I would like to present to the presenters, and I'll let whomever is interested field each question, is how do you account for the diversity among the Latina population? I guess perhaps in your study.
So yeah, that's a great question, Shakira. So yes, as we mentioned, for the purposes of this toolkit, it was mostly families of Mexican and Mexican American descent, but recognizing that there's lots of intersectionalities that exist amongst not only the Mexican population, depending on acculturation or generation, but even intersectionality amongst other Latinas, such as like Puerto Rican. I know our programs in the Northeast serve Dominicanos, and so a lot of cross-intersectionalities can exist with the different themes and the different recommendations. So this is not like a one-size-fits-all approach. These recommendations can definitely be adjusted accordingly, but there are a lot of common themes, even within our Black youth as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure, and I'll add to that, Shakira. As a direct care practitioner, I find it very important for us to take the time to really learn, to really know what is their definition of being Latino or Latina. What are the experiences, the traditions, the norms that give them that definition. And so I think in starting with that, it can really feed what your next steps will be.
Okay, fantastic. And we have another question here, sort of a technical question, I guess, or resource question. Can you get a copy of the ethnocultural empathy scale? So I guess someone is looking for that particular scale and how they might access it.
Yes, we can definitely provide that resource either in the chat box or to add them to share with all the registrants.
Okay, fantastic. And let's see, another question is do you have any suggestions for mentoring youth within this particular population.
I guess, can that person be a little bit more specific? Like in which regard?
Yeah, unfortunately the question is it's pretty broad. So do you have any type of mentoring, like I guess maybe if you have any suggestions. I know that you talked a lot about how to go about approaching young people that you're working with within, Latino youth that you're working with, and I'm not sure if there maybe are some other approaches that you might highlight in terms of mentoring.
Definitely. Yes, definitely. So something that's unique about the Latino and Latina youth is that well, they are very diverse, but then one of the important things to note is that you really have to build that relationship with the parents as well, because the parent can sometimes, make or break that relationship. The relationship with the parent is really important to leading to the success of the mentor-mentee relationship. The parent is going to be the one that you're always going to communicate with, and sometimes the parents themselves are going through their own trauma, and so just recognizing that and honoring that. Another thing that's very unique about our Latino youth, in addition to the biculturalism that they're, going through every day, some of our youth are also helping the parent to support their families, and so a lot of times our Latino youth have this balancing act of, helping to support their younger siblings back home and then also trying to be a kid themselves, and so honoring that balancing act as well. But I think more than anything is like making the connection with the parent and letting them know that you're there as a source of support and not to replace them, because parents are very protective of their youth, but if they see that the relationship is more of a support or a supplemental role, I think that will really help lead to a successful relationship.
I will add that as far as activities for mentoring, a lot of our youth, most of our youth, I would say, really express the interest of wanting to express their Latino-ness, so wanting to really learn about their culture, learn about their values, and then even have a chance to practice them and express them. So I think that would be really helpful to do.
Excellent responses, excellent. And another question is, which can be answered pretty straightforward. Does Southwest Key provide agency training, and does Southwest Key programs reach Colorado?
So we can definitely help customize different trainings. With regards to the Hermana's Keeper, we can really help customize the trainings for you, either in person or from a webinar. And then as far as Colorado?
Yeah, so I'll add to that as well, Maria, is in terms of customizing, I think, this toolkit really lends itself to really pick, a few of the recommendations and then really hone in on those and really practice those and continuously assess those. So I think that's something pretty neat of our toolkit.
Okay.
And the second part of that question was,
are we in Colorado?
If we currently serve in Colorado, we don't. Not yet.
But anyone in Colorado, more than welcome to use the toolkit, and this is, we're definitely open to sharing the toolkit. So please, if it's something that you want to distribute among your organizations, please do.
Okay. And there was a question that might be somewhat in relationship to trainings and Southwest Key sort of helping different organizations sort of come up to speed with the toolkit. So there was a question around the curriculum. So it said, is it possible to review the curriculum? So I'm not sure if that means, right now, of course that would be pretty extensive, but is the curriculum available, and how might others, get access to it? Is it in the toolkit, or would that require some extra training? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned, the toolkit is definitely available for everyone, but as we've discussed, and what Gladys and Maria both went into, was that there's a lot of detail and thought that can go into even each individual action step. So as far as the curriculum goes, that's something that Southwest Key is providing. And we're happy to work with organizations to provide that. But the publicly available information is the toolkit itself. So if it's something that organizations feel like they can take and and implement on their own, they are absolutely welcome to, but if they want that more customized curriculum, then they would definitely can reach out to us, and there's an email address and a phone number on the webinar itself if they are interested in reaching out for that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And another question is can you talk a bit about the youth and family changes over time? So perhaps, changes in any types of behavior, school attendance, family relationships, etc.
I guess if the question is asking in regards to like our Family Keys programs and the girls that were part of this project, I mean, Family Keys provides an all-encompassing wraparound approach, and so it includes the entire family, right? And so it's a 3-month program, and we work to provide, identify allies in the community, help parents identify advocacy and advocates at the schools, because sometimes our parents aren't aware of who to contact for which issues, and so really building a system of support around the family so that once we're no longer involved with the family. And so our program has been shown to decrease levels of truancy and lead to either no involvement or lower involvement in the system. So 95% of our youth don't have system involvement in Texas.
Okay. And there's another question around family engagement. So please share about family engagement and how successful are you in engaging the families into the programs? How successful is the program without, and how successful is the program without parental engagement? You need me to read that again, I can, but.
No, I'm just taking in that question. It's a lot of part, and I think family engagement is the topic that is, for sure is in our minds here at Southwest Key. We're constantly assessing our strategies and constantly assessing our success with family engagement and parent engagement. So I will say with family engagement, and again, coming from a direct care practitioner perspective, we take a lot of time, as I mentioned, within our toolkit. So just with the Latino culture, they're very specific about that personal relationship. And it's something that they value. It's a space that we would even find is very sacred. And so being intentional in that, being mindful in that, I think has helped us create that positive relationship, that bond, that trust, that sort of comes back to us and families reaching out to us instead of us having to chase family members. But have we experienced families and parents who are not engaging? Definitely. And I think we come from the mindset of if it's a barrier or if it's present, not to take it so negatively, but just coming back to the drawing board and thinking about how to strategize to increase that engagement within our programs. I will say from my own experience is that it's a lot harder working the case, but I wouldn't say it's a definite unsuccessful.
Mm-hmm. And Shakira, this is Maria. Something that I feel like I maybe touched upon earlier when talking about trauma is many parents in our Family Keys programs are also experiencing their forms of trauma, and so I don't think that you can address the youth's trauma without also addressing the parents' trauma, because we're not going to be in the youth's life, permanently, and the parents are, and so I think that you really have to acknowledge it, honor it, and provide resources to the parents, providing a safe space for them to be able to share whatever pain or things that they're going through, and then helping to find resources and connect them to the resources in the community. A lot of our parents either are new to the country, have been recently released from being incarcerated, have had past trauma that was never addressed, early on from past trauma, and then also arrested development. A lot of our parents are teen parents, and so really never had the opportunity to really develop fully and address their trauma.
And there was definitely evidence of that through the Toolkit research. And one of the things that came out of the focus groups that was really interesting for us is as we were asking questions to caregivers, there were no questions around obstacles or challenges that they face, but the vast majority of our caregivers began talking about their own challenges, and And so it just goes to the point that Maria was just making, which is that we definitely need this space for them, and that was very, very clear in our focus groups with caregivers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, so really, taking really an intergenerational approach to working with the young people as well as their families, and understanding that oftentimes what the young person is experiencing has also been experienced by the parent and quite possibly generations back. So that's very important things to bring up. And another thing, just sort of touching on the issue of trauma, you spoke quite a bit about healing-informed approaches, which I think is such an important piece to lift up. I was just kind of wondering if you all might be interested in saying just a little more about the healing-informed approach, and if you might have any specific referrals that you might be able to provide the audience where they might be able to reach out or read a little more about what it means to be take a healing-informed approach to the work.
Sure. So what we have found in our programs is like a lot of our youth who interact with various providers or entities, what they're so quick to do to our youth is look for the quick fix, because there's so many youth that are going through these issues, right? And so I feel like as a society and just in these systems that we work with every day, we're so quick to really medicate our youth. And so what we're now looking at is alternatives, right? And so like I mentioned before, some of the different alternatives that we've implemented, like the horse therapy or like the meditation or yoga, just simple things, have really done a world of good in changing our youth's trajectory and showing them that, you can do other things besides, obviously barring, youth who do have to have medication, but we're trying to look for alternatives all the time because, there has to be a better way, right? And so, but like I mentioned before, some of our partners who have had more experience in this, like the Chinachli and National Competency Network, have really spent years studying this and implementing things like this, and just really identifying with your youth, asking them about their day. I feel like sometimes schools don't ever get this opportunity or take the time to do this, and then with the schools being overcrowded and classrooms being overcrowded, that it's so much more easy to say, oh, go to ISS, or oh, I'm going to suspend you, rather than figuring out what exactly the youth needs and then just connecting them, identifying resources like therapy or like places for them to talk about what they're going through, and incorporating safe spaces. Like there's some schools in our community who have implemented a safe space, so like if a student needs space to cool down before coming into the classroom, they can go and kind of spend some time in a kind of therapeutic room before going to class, and we've noticed that really helps decrease, the alternative, which can be a lot more costly and a lot more detrimental.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And can you make any recommendations for communicating with Latino families if you do not have anyone that is fluent in Spanish, say, for example, at an organization?
Yeah, this is, as we have been introducing this toolkit, this is a question that has come up frequently, and I think a lot of our communities struggle to find the resources to hire bilingual staff, and or just don't have access to bilingual staff. And our response to that, of course, is that in hiring bilingual staff, we really have to be intentional. And I know Southwest Key, because of the population that we serve and the population and our community, we may have access to additional folks that other communities may not. However, we also are extremely intentional, and I know we've done recruitment in as far as Puerto Rico to hire folks. So making sure that we really are intentional and investing in things that we need to prioritize, and if bilingual staff is something your organization needs to prioritize, that would be going outside of your community to find those people. But also additionally, I think it's just really important that we don't get stuck on the Spanish-speaking aspect of incorporating Latino cultural heritage into our practice, because there are a lot of things that we can do to serve our Latina youth, and this toolkit is full of recommendations and action steps that don't require, Spanish speaking. So one of the things that we've talked about in our team is the percentage of communication that's not nonverbal, and the exact percentage is escaping me right now. But I know when we're working with our Latino families, even if you're not speaking the same language, you can communicate with them in a lot of ways that is very positive and engaging, that doesn't require Spanish speaking. So while we understand it definitely is ideal, we know that it's not always feasible for every program in every location. Definitely.
Yeah, and I think, in talking about that last piece of Deanna's answer is, I think all of that also puts us in line in working within the values that specific family is expressing. Are you going to say something, Mariana?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, it's all about your interaction with the families, as Gladys and Deanna both mentioned, from the initial phone call to going into the home, like Gladys touched upon in her piece about, honoring and respecting different power structures. If, you have to talk with both mom and dad, recognizing and honoring that. But it's all about nonverbal language too, and just asking and getting to know the culture and asking questions, I think, is also important.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you. And I think we have time for at least one more question, maybe two. So the first one is, did you run into LGBTQIA plus Latino youth with your study? And if so, how do their answers individually or from the family compare to cis Latino youth?
I don't remember interacting, but I know we're currently experiencing our LGBTQ youth now in our programs, and definitely that's another layer that we have to be really sensitive and aware of, especially in our Latino families, which sometimes, or our experience has been that they really need extra support because of our different, backgrounds, whether it be religious or, being more conservative. Definitely offering extra support like PFLAG and GLISTEN and other resources in the community.
Yeah, and to answer a little bit more directly, we didn't code specifically in our research for LGBTQIA additional Latina youth. So I don't want to speak directly in response to, no, we don't have specific themes that are catered directly toward that population. But we definitely included, regardless of how the Latinas identify, we included all of their voices in our findings.
Okay. And I will actually turn it back over to Adam to close out the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Shakira, and thanks for the presenters for a great discussion on this topic. We just have a quick few brief reminders. So the webinar will be archived on OJJDP's online university in about 3 weeks. For more information, you can contact OJJDP's National Girls Initiative or Southwest Key Programs. You can also contact OJJDP's or NTTAC via the Help Desk by following the contact information on the next slide. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and that concludes our webinar. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.